By way of introduction, I want to just call to your attention another little book. This is one that we published at the Center for Security Policy, but it is a document that was introduced into evidence in the Holy Land Foundation trial, which probably gave us, those of us outside of government, outside of the classified domain, as clear an insight into what we are up against in terms of the Islamists' subversion within the United States as anything that's come along. This particular document, which our next speaker, Stephen Coughlin, I think introduced me to, is instructive in a number of different respects, but I just would mention it in this one regard, which I know he will address at greater length. It describes the mission of the Muslim Brotherhood in America as a kind of civilization jihad whose purpose is to destroy Western civilization from within by their hands, meaning ours, and the hands of the believers, so that God's religion is made victorious over all other religions. It also helpfully identifies a number of the organizations that are aligned with that mission statement and the Muslim Brotherhood in executing it. And I just couldn't be more pleased that Steve Coughlin, who has taught me a great deal on this subject and is about to publish a new book on it as well, entitled Catastrophic Failure, is here to talk us through what's happening today, Steve, with today's totalitarian threat.
Thank you, Frank. Can I take that for a second? I just want to do something. You know, both me and my wife went to DLI in the early 80s. We were Russian language qualified. We did the crypto analysis component to that and did what you would do when you get that type of training. And it was at that time that I read this book called
DLI being the Defense Language
Institute, I'm sorry. And it was in that time I came across a book that came out from this publisher called Samizdat. And it was called Utopia and Power, or Utopia i Vlasti. And it went into some detail about how the Soviets went after the kolhozes. Those would be the peasant farmers, the people that they said they represented, to forcefully convert them to the kolhoz. And it was only because of Herbert Hoover that some of these people even survived, because he put together one of the first ever mass relief programs. But I think it's important. We talk about this. This is the document, the first document I wrote when I was in the Pentagon. That I was asked to analyze this document, and somebody leaked it, and it was within a couple months that then the assistant to the Deputy Secretary of Defense worked to get me fired. It caused a huge explosion. But I want to kind of hit what Frank just read, just to really put a hard point on here, because so I could read. You just heard him say it. The process of settlement. If you ever hear someone say they're only here to settle, and you know that somebody who represents the Muslim Brotherhood, I want you to do a hard statutory construction. When they say this, it means that, and it means nothing else. Okay? Let me see. Now I have to find it. Okay. Okay. The process of settlement is a civilization jihadist process. Let me qualify this. This was seized in a raid of an American Muslim Brotherhood entity. This was admitted into a federal court of law. Okay? So as a legal matter, this is a legal fact. This is their strategy document. So when you hear them talk about by their hands, it means everybody who works with them to help them achieve this goal. The process of settlement is a civilization jihadist process with all the word means. The Ikhwan, that's the Brotherhood, must understand their work in America is kind of a grand jihad in eliminating and destroying the Western civilization from within and sabotaging its miserable house by their hands and the hands of the believers, so that it is eliminated and God's religion is made victorious over all other religions. So if you have, for example, a law professor on your staff who belongs to a Muslim Brotherhood entity, he exists for the sole purpose of doing this. And it doesn't matter what else might be said. So you know you're in trouble when you're watching, when 50 people send you a video clip of an Al Jazeera news story where there's a Muslim brother on one part of the story and a Pentagon official on another, basically alluding that you're a nut. You know, think about that. I mean, in all the time I was ever in the military, the idea of a U.S. military officer going on the foreign media to cut down a U.S. officer, that's just simply unheard of. And it's just a way of telling you, for people who think that things are business as usual and this is something on the margins, it's not. I'd like to throw out a couple things of, did you know? How did you hear this, or did you not hear about this? For example, how many people here heard about the largest influence operation on Capitol Hill in history? Probably, but certainly within the last 50 years, where someone was convicted just about a year ago. How many people heard about that? It was an influence operation that ran for about 20 years. It was a man named Nabi Fai. He was reporting to Pakistani ISI, that's their intelligence division. And he was a prominent member and leader of a number of the various Muslim Brotherhood front groups that are the people who brief our national security people on the war on terror, who are by name beholden to this document that we have admitted into a federal court of law. Because my point is, it's what you don't know that's going to kill you. Starting in 2010, late in 2010, I started giving a briefing. It was given on Capitol Hill. I gave it in January 2011 to the FBI CT division. And I actually told Frank one day, you can run with this. You can take it to the bank. And that was this, that the Arab world is coming down. It's going to be a Muslim Brotherhood operation from the very beginning. Here's where they're going to fall. Here's how they're going to fall. And they're going to position it as a democracy movement. And of course, they will put those democratic movements into rear square because they know that's who you're going to go to. But at all times, this was a Muslim Brotherhood operation, so that at all times you could predict every event that's happened, almost like you could put it on a calendar. And of course, the calendar wouldn't be dates, it would be event-driven. But how is it? Because for the fall of Mubarak, the Brotherhood couldn't do that. Who put the heavy diplomatic pressure on the Mubarak regime for him to sit down? Who brought military resources to bear to overthrow, switch sides on the war on terror, and nobody seems to even know or care. And the problem is, this is easily demonstrable. We knew who the people were in Libya, who we were giving aid to, because a high percentage of them we captured in Iraq. They constituted, among a couple groups of them, the largest group of foreign fighters that we encountered in Iraq. So there's so much about this stuff that is known and knowable. And the interesting thing about it is, the facts, when you decide to orient on facts, they cut one way. This is not one of those, gosh, you know, you say tomato and I say tomato, and you know, if you kind of look at this and you spin yourself 3 times and look sideways, you can come up with a counter-argument. We know who the Muslim Brotherhood is. We have their document in America, we have their global document, and we have their policy implementation documents. We have so many of them that we've helped members of the Judiciary Committee subpoena the Holder Attorney General office to release the boxes of documents that we have. How many people know about that? Boxes. They have the checks written. So here's the thing. A couple years ago, about a year ago, maybe 18 months ago, a member of Congress gave me a letter. It was a letter that was written by Farina Akhara, who runs an organization called the Muslim Advocate. And of course, that's a Muslim Brotherhood, extremely friendly, I'd say. It's clearly in the Brotherhood orbit, demanding that a number of people be fired, and some people were named by name, but also called for a purge. Let me just see here. Let me just run down. Also demanded a review of all training, a purge of all federal government training materials, ensure that personal reviews are conducted and all trainers and other government employees are promoted or demoted, and issue guidance that clearly states that you cannot talk about the Brotherhood. This is in the letter to the White House. I also got the response that was favorable. And then, you know, within a year of that letter coming out, we have from the Joint Forces Staff College the fact that the chairman called for the relief of some military officers, briefing facts about the Muslim Brotherhood and terrorism. We have then Director Mueller calling it a purge when directly asked in oversight testimony. I mean, when you hear about words like mandatory retraining, that's something we kind of have associated historically with the other side. And I just would like to point out, it was this week, because people are kind of pinging me because they told me I called this, and one of the things I like to say, if you orient on the facts of who these people are, you can predict everything they're going to do, is that Putin is going to maneuver himself into becoming the person who's going to be recognized as the protector of Christian aspirations in the Middle East. And guess what? That just happened. If you go to the Middle East, in the Arab world, they know who's killing them, and they know who's backing the people killing them. And it ain't the Soviet Union anymore. And I think this is something it's one of those things, we really need to look at these things. So we had that letter, but you know, there was an NPR article that came out in June 2011. It was completely erroneous, basically saying things about what was briefed at a presentation that actually were not briefed by people who eventually lost their jobs for doing things like putting out bad information. And then it said, and there's also this one of those guys, he's going to be briefing the CIA later this summer. Well, that person was, of course, me. And this is when we first saw the pattern come down. The pattern was that came out, a trending left publication came out with something, followed, and you could argue coordinated, a CARE document demanding an investigation. CARE, Council on American Islamic Relations, a known element of the Muslim Brotherhood, known to be formed out of Hamas. Hamas is still a registered on the FTO, Foreign Terrorist Organizations list as a terrorist organization. Of course, Article 2 of the Hamas Covenant says they are the Muslim Brotherhood. So, I mean, so we can win that argument on the facts. We always do. But CARE coming out demanding that there be an investigation at this training stop. And soon enough, a person from a news publication called Wired Magazine started writing articles, identifying me and saying things, and I would show up at, oh, by the way, that CI training was canceled. In fact, the CIA had their countering violent extremism mission canceled, and it was transferred over to DHS, who took that mission on. Okay, but then what happened is I was going to go brief at the FBI. It had been briefing there continuously, and all of a sudden, that got stopped. And then all of a sudden, he wrote some articles about me briefing the information operations course, and all of a sudden, that got stopped. He wrote some articles, and each one of them, you had a Wired magazine stating things which are brazenly erroneous, followed by a CARE demand, and they came back to back. They were sometimes in the same part of the day. And you know, sometimes if something comes out late at night, and the other thing comes out late at night, you know, you start to understand what's going on. But the other part of it was, when the person from the CIA was calling, or when the person from the DOD was calling, or when the person from the FBI calling said they had to cancel it out, every one of them said, you know, we'd like to say we're going to resolve this, but this is coming from the White House. Okay. And of course, I have an attorney, and they have the names of the people who did that, and you know, that'll be something that's memorialized somewhere. But so we had this going on. You had Lieutenant Colonel Dooley lose his job. Now, I have a personal background on that, so I'm not going to go too far in that, but a lot of what caused Lieutenant Colonel Dooley to face problems was the fact that we confronted one of the people in his class when he said some things which were clearly alarming. In fact, the rest of the class was alarmed at what was said, when it turned out that this colonel who was in the class wasn't even a member of the class. I'll stop there. So where does that leave us today? What does it mean when we see this penetration? That nobody knows who the OIC is. Because I will tell you, in our circle, we know who the OIC is.
You might say what it is.
I was going to. In our little circle, we know it's the Organization of Islamic Conference. Okay? And we know by varying degrees what it is and what they stand for. But if you take one step out of this office and go to the office next door, nobody knows about it. That would be like fighting the Cold War and not knowing who the Warsaw Pact was. Serious. Okay? And why is that important? Because on July 15, 2011, our Secretary of State met with the head of the OIC in Turkey and agreed to help pass a UN resolution called 1618, which was known to give effect to the OIC's 10-year plan to make defamation of Islam a punishable crime through UN legislation, okay, that they were going to then work to implement. At the same time this is happening, you had the CRCL, Civil Rights, Civil Liberties Division of DHS, working with members of the Brotherhood to create what they were calling the combating violent extremism narrative. And I have to seriously plug Judicial Watch, because the things we were saying you should expect to see that I was able to frame pretty tightly. Eventually, Judicial Watch documents came out, Freedom of Information Act documents came out, that nailed it hard to the ground. And I'll tell you why that's important. Because we could project what was going to happen just by following their doctrine and what they were doing, with documents that would later come out that said that's exactly what they're doing, and it's completely predictable because they are what they purport to be. The number one objective of the Muslim Brotherhood in America is to get you to try to understand world events without understanding the events driving them, and turn it into a political science narrative and think that that's an answer. All the time these events are going on. So we have the State Department getting it passed. It was actually the U.S. State Department that managed to get it passed through the UN in December 2011. You have the CRCL at DHS implementing it, and under direct testimony to the chairman of the Subcommittee on the Constitution, the number 2 person at the Justice Department, Assistant Perez at the time, was directly asked twice if he would forswear ever doing something as staggeringly unconstitutional as subordinating the First Amendment of the Constitution to Islamic concepts of slander under the name of Islamophobia. Okay. And twice, under direct questioning, he refused to answer. So how many people were aware of any of those three? And how many people were aware of all three of them happening concurrently? Except people who've heard me brief, let me say. He's helped edit my book, he knows. But how nailed down is that? Am I like putting tinfoil on my head to say that, or can we nail it down hard? We can use FOUO documents from Judicial Watch to nail this down. There's no place for cover. And yet it's not even being reported. So I think we have a very serious situation. And I want to end because I'd like to thank the Judicial Watch people, because they make what I do. They basically confirm what I say 2 years ago when those documents come out. They came out with some documents this summer on al-Awlaki. They came out with some documents on Hassan. I will tell you, when Major Hassan struck, the FBI came up to me and they asked, how is it possible that you were briefing how terrorism would happen in this country, and that Major Hassan's briefing where he declared his hostility matched your brief on 19 slides, word for word? And my answer was, I was telling you why they're going to do this, and he was telling you why he's going to act doing this. They follow Islamic law. How do we know this? They say so. So here's the point. I got into it with some people at the FBI because I said I wanted to see those emails to Major Hassan. Major Hassan sent to al-Awlaki, and they said there's no relevance here. It'll be in my book. But what I just recently did was I analyzed them according to what they specifically said was the basis of their decision making, and showed that everything about those correspondence had to do with an orientation to Islamic law. And if they had just accepted that what they said drove their decision making actually did, and pretend it was true, just for due diligence purposes. Even if they say 95% of it says it's wrong, but just to satisfy crackpots like Steve Coughlin, we'll do the due diligence and map it to Islamic law. They would have found that that was an open declaration of hostility. He pledged his allegiance to not only al-Qaeda, but al-Qaeda is run by al-Awlaki, and acted. So I think that I wanted to try to tie in this pervasive encroachment. Most of these people are not spies. You cannot arrest the Muslim Brotherhood for conspiracy because they write these things in English. And they publish them, and you can go on Amazon and get them. Serious. So the question becomes, we see this major influence operation going on. We see that a huge 20-year influence operation hitting both sides of the aisle went on, and it didn't even make the news. And I would like people to start to become prepared when the Middle East completely collapses around our feet. There were people who warned about it with extreme precision, okay, with specificity. And if you read my book, you'll find find out some of it. And when these people are shocked, it will never be because they didn't have the information. It will be because they put their ideological drivers ahead of facts that otherwise couldn't have pointed to any other direction. Thank you.
Steve, thank you.